Cool. So thanks a lot for inviting me out. My talk is going to be a little bit less technical than I think what you've heard here today. But I work at a company called GoGrid, which is one of the first cloud computing companies to adopt the Zen hypervisor. We launched in the beginning of 2008. And so today I'll be talking a little bit about how GoGrid uses the Zen hypervisor, some trends that we're seeing in the marketplace related to hypervisor adoption, some of the reasons why, and kind of bring it back to sort of what all that means for Zen and the opportunities that it provides for the people in this room and for the community. So just kind of really briefly, we're based up in San Francisco, and we're about 100 people. And we have a data center in San Francisco, and then we're opening up a data center in a couple of months out in Ashburn, Virginia. And then next year, we'll go to Asia and Europe as well. So I think this slide, some of you have seen just really briefly, the way that we see sort of the ecosystem of companies that are adopting cloud computing. GoGrid occupies the bottom of this pyramid as an infrastructure as a service cloud. So we compete with EC2 and Rackspace, companies like OpSource, and as you move up the stack, you go up to application clouds. So I think all of you have seen kind of probably something like this. So like our service, you can launch Windows, Linux VMs. There's F5 load balancing. The way that we kind of charge for our service is on RAM hours and transfer. So every hour, we will sum up how much RAM you've deployed across all of your guests, and then we'll multiply that number by some amount of cents depending on your level of plan, and then that's how you get charged for it. So RAM is really our major resource, and we'll talk a little bit about sort of what that means for our reliability and service levels as well. So kind of really briefly, that's what our GUI looks like. I'll let you look at that on our website if you're kind of interested. So how we use Zen. We run our hypervisor in HVM mode. That way we can run multiple unmodified guest operating systems on our nodes. We use EPT, and thanks Jun, who helped us out a little while ago. And we use Intel on GoGrid. I know we're at AMD, so please hold your tomatoes if you work for AMD. But we are using the new Nehalem chipsets and hyperthreading. We're also testing Westmere. We spend a whole lot of effort at GoGrid on testing the reliability and stability of our nodes, which is what we call the physical boxes that our guests live on. And today our nodes, we run a ratio of 1 core to 4 gigs of RAM. So we use the credit CPU scheduler to be able to assign for a pro rata share of CPU per gig of RAM per guest. So we have an algorithm whenever we provision a virtual machine onto our nodes that it assigns the right class priorities so that you can, when you have more RAM, you have more CPU. So we're very happy with Zen and as one of the earliest adopters. But let's kind of take a look at some trends that we've been seeing. I think while Zen has enjoyed really strong adoption from the early players in the market, some of the biggest players in the market like EC2 and GoGrid and Rackspace, what we've seen in the past year is that more and more enterprise clouds have come onto the marketplace, and lots of them are using commercial hypervisors. Like VMware. I think AT&T is using some Open Solaris stuff. I don't know to what extent they're doing that. And there's a lot of cons to using VMware as an infrastructure as a service provider, and we'll talk a little bit about those later. But first let's, I want to talk about why VMware, in my view, is being adopted by these clouds. So really taking a step back, what do consumers of IaaS clouds, what are they looking for? And this is evidence that we've gained from talking to our customers, from interviewing potential customers. And I think when designing features for XCP and for the hypervisor, you should sort of always be asking yourself, how is what I'm doing going to further our solutions or further solve these top 3 issues that customers want from the services that they consume. First and foremost, they don't want to be locked into any one cloud, right? They want to be able, it takes some amount of time and effort to put your stuff into an infrastructure cloud, and customers want to know that if that cloud doesn't meet their needs in the future around price or reliability or anything else, that they want to be able to quickly move around. That's one of the unique value propositions of this kind of service. Obviously they want reliability, sort of just as in Maslow's hierarchy of needs for human beings, whereas nothing else is important unless you're safe, you have shelter, and you have food. The same way with this stuff, right? If your VMs don't stay up, all the bells and whistles and the features really don't matter. So, guaranteeing service level agreements is something that is really important for customers, and we'll get into a little bit about that later as well. And then, obviously, security. I've heard one of the enterprise IT managers that I've worked with told me that his view is that there's 2 types of data. There's data that really at the end of the day, there's data that if it gets compromised, you get fired, and there's data that if it gets compromised, you don't get fired. And today, the latter is what the cloud is good for, or is what kind of people perceive in terms of being able to what type of data to store in the cloud. And so that's really important to customers as well. So, and so about vendor lock-in. Let's take a look at really take a bit of a further step back about software, how software is sold and consumed by people. And a long time ago, this is even before, I think like a lot of you in this room probably know more than me, is that software was sold by direct sales channels. You had demos being done by sales guys or sales engineers. If you were lucky, you got to see actually a demo on a laptop, but most of the time it was a PowerPoint presentation of the software that someone's selling. A lot of times you had a manager being sold by a sales engineer, and then the engineers or the people that were going to implement this thing never even got to see the software until they were told, hey, go make it work. And you had to actually, most of the time get a budget request just to install that thing and test it out. With the internet, software companies wisened up. They started putting their stuff on the internet. You could download it very quickly. The perpetual licensing model, where customers had to, potentially commit for a year or 2 years to buy a piece of software, they started, offering versions of their software that you could demo and install for free. But the licensing was still perpetual. You still had to buy a one-time, kind of cost for your license, and it was still kind of a relatively a pain in the butt to install it and to trial it. And so, it wasn't easy to test and trial software, and the perpetual licensing really meant a lot of times decision paralysis. Like you didn't really want to, it was a big commitment to actually install software and buy it. So it was, if it's running, then I'm not even going to change it, and a lot of times you were really kind of loath to even trying any new things. So, who remembers the Rio player? Back in the day, this is the gentleman who's trying to install software or songs onto that thing. The Rio player, prior to, it was a flop. It didn't actually sell, and they pulled it, right? And some of the reasons why are because it was, very difficult to get songs onto it, and and there was no easy way to actually buy songs and put songs onto it. People actually learned that it was actually easier just to rip a CD and to play it in my car than to use this Rio player. But what was it that made the MP3 player blow up? Anyone? It was the iTunes Store, right? With the iTunes Store, well, now we were able to only pay for the songs that we want and very easily put stuff onto our MP3 players. And all of a sudden, we had a whole new market, and the rest is history from there. in a way, you can look at the Rio player was kind of like a cloud server without access to a virtual appliance marketplace. And there's a lot of kind of arguments that you can make against that analogy. But the power of the marketplace and the power of an ecosystem, well, now people are happy with MP players. I want to talk a bit about the power of a marketplace in solving the problem of vendor lock-in for cloud computing customers. Okay, there's a positive feedback loop that happens that as software vendors are able to build appliances and make images with their software on it, more and more cloud computing providers are going to want to plug into that marketplace. So they're going to want to have a service where their customers can leverage the value that the ISVs, the independent software vendors, the value that they provide and is contained within that marketplace. Customers give feedback, so it's easy for me as a customer to be able to very, very quickly trial and buy software through this marketplace. And so what that means is that IaaS clouds are adopting commercial hypervisors like VMware because it gives them the option to participate in this ecosystem, the VMware appliance marketplace. And thus, those customers have more options. They have more cloud computing providers that they can actually get services from because they know that those providers will support the appliances that they're buying. And so more IaaS clouds equals more choice for customers. And ISVs are always going to need a way to sell their software. Consumers want an easy way to trial test it and to host it on production. Licensing models are moving to the cloud. Today, if you're a software company that's not delivering your software on a monthly basis or a per user basis, then you should seriously start thinking about that. Otherwise, you're going to be like Oracle is today still. And then the real-time reviews and the feedback is also very valuable as well because customers want to be able to see that. So this sort of creates a huge opportunity for Zen, right? I mean, the biggest marketplace I think that Zen appliances have today is probably EC2's AMIs. The list of AMIs that are available on Amazon EC2. But those are still kind of proprietary as well. But ISVs will create appliances for multiple hypervisors. If I'm a software vendor, I'll create an appliance for VMware, I'll create it for for a Zen virtual appliance, or for anything else. So we need to seed a marketplace with Zen virtual appliances and be able to make it easy for customers for cloud providers to consume those appliances, and then also make it easy to consume VMware and AMI appliances as well. And the V2V feature of XCP is is a great step in this direction. We need to make that easier to use. So the funny thing here is that as an IaaS cloud operator, I don't really want to be using a commercial hypervisor. It's just that VMware now has this ecosystem of stuff, and the ecosystem is not just for software, for commercial software. It's tools that people will build and dump into it that allow appliances to move from one cloud to another, or to sync with stuff in your data center to the cloud, and vice versa. But as an IaaS cloud, I don't want to be using VMware. I can't control my costs. It's very expensive. The cost to license a VMware node is actually more than the cost of the hardware, amortized over 3 years. And it's impossible to, it's very hard to differentiate on your services if you're a provider and you're using VMware, and if that company decides to move in a direction like what Apple's done with iTunes, and they limit the number of providers that they can that can participate in these ecosystems, then you're stuck. But I don't think that's going to happen. But just as an example. Let's build the marketplace there. So on SLA guarantees, let's talk a little bit about that. we spent the 90s training customers that that a shared hosting is good. Remember, like shared web hosting, and then we spent the 2000 or the aughts training customers, from that a dedicated servers are where you want to be. You want to use colocation. You want to have a dedicated box. You want to buy dedicated servers because you don't want to, kind of deal with sharing problems. You want your own, you want to hug your own server. And now with cloud computing, we're telling customers, hey, it's okay to use shared again. It's, no problem. Just trust us, it'll work. But the problem that we've got, and this is, an issue around all hypervisors today, is that, that we don't do a great job in providing guarantees around I/O. The no-op schedule on the storage repository does a pretty good job of sort of preventing starvation, but it doesn't do a great job in all cases. And even in our company, there's still cases where certain customers' virtual machines are impacted by the I/O utilization of other VMs on the same node. And so in order to provide really a great SLA guarantee on I/O, we need to really fix these problems and help fix these problems. And it would be even better to have be able to assign a maximum throughput per guest, sort of a throttle, so that no one VM can go above a certain point. And this is obviously very complicated across reads, writes, and sustained and random. It's a very complicated problem. And ideally, we can provide a quality of service for I/O, so that we can resell different quality of services to our virtual machine, to customers that use virtual machines. And this also helps when we're kind of testing new generations of hardware. We want to be able to, as we leverage faster storage subsystems and faster, faster nodes, it's important that we can provide a common product and a common level of service to our customers, even as we have different generations of hardware on the grid. And then oversubscription. I know that this is possible with certain types of hypervisors and certain modes. I know that KVM can do this, but with HVM mode on Zen, I'd love to be able to oversubscribe resources like RAM and storage. That way we can get, we can optimize our hardware more, and then be able to get more revenue per box. So that's it. I encourage you all, if you want to try GoGrid, to use that coupon code. You get $100 free. And that was my talk. I think we have a bunch of time left. So if you guys have any questions, or kind of open it up for discussion. Sure.
Were you motivating the use of OVF?
I'm sorry?
Your whole concern around portability and everything else, to what extent is that addressed by OVF and standardization and that kind of thing?
OVF, the virtual format. Well, I think that's a great step in the right direction, right? But it's, and the formats are there, but it's just that the marketplace, from my view, is not there yet.
Marketplace for the appliances in that form?
Yeah.
That's all. There's a huge momentum around it now. In the better, in the same as I see it. I don't see any reason why it would not succeed.
Oh, and I think it has every reason to succeed. It's just that I think that the commercial appliance marketplaces are, in my view, like in my view, kind of getting really, really popular as well. But which marketplace are you referring to?
Well, in general, it's not clear if there is a marketplace.
Right. So what is the marketplace? It's
vendors making products available to work in a particular context. So customers will buy what they want. So something will happen all at once, but that's okay. The key concern that you expressed is one, which is the need for portability of workload between enterprise and cloud. Right?
right.
And that I think is a valid concern, so that this community needs to deal with for sure. But as far as I'm aware, most of the tools are available and open source already.
Right. Yeah, but I like, that's true, and I'd like to see a way, though, to be able to easily, though, kind of consume appliances in any format, and convert them to work within the hypervisor that the cloud is supporting.
So Kensho supports extracting and installing multi-VM appliances from VMware, Hyper-V, certainly everything we did in Zen server.
Mhm.
So it will support EC2.
Right.
And I think the B2B stuff is there too. So
And,
I don't know whether the
and so is that used, and so is that used, like I have to download it into my workstation and then run these kind of utilities on it and then re-upload it?
it could be in line with any
Right.
business of pushing blocks between places. In general, though, I think there's, from a portability perspective, there is one big barrier, which is vendor licensing the software. Okay? There are two barriers. That's one. That is, are you allowed to move your image from your corporate site to some cloud? Does the license still work? And the vendors, the operating system vendors are all trying to screw that up. The other issue is that the cloud vendors generally view an opportunity, see themselves as having an opportunity in reselling operating systems under a SPLA license. So a lot of folks want to sell you Windows under Microsoft SPLA and manage it through the lifecycle there for you as part of the services, because they're not going to let you move your own Windows copy out there anymore. They don't want you to. That's another barrier. Those are the two that I see.
Well, I think
Okay.
if I were to understand Bob's argument right in the analogy of music, what you're talking about is AAD to MPC converter, and that's different from iTunes Marketplace. These are two different things, actually.
Oh, sure.
Right?
Otherwise,
So the other thing is more about virality and operation and
But it's not, that's absolutely right, but I just don't know what you could do to make a marketplace. Not clear what to do with it.
Well, the marketplace, I mean, it's just about like ease of use. As a customer of a cloud computing provider, I want to be able to, very easily go and look at a list of appliances and pick the one that I want and just have it work. Customers are not very savvy. They're not very savvy enough to actually pull stuff off and run utilities on it and then re-upload it.
Would be for you guys as a provider,
Mhm.
would be to build a front-end service
Right.
on top of the VMware Virtual Clients Marketplace. Just reparent their web page, put the Kensho B2B tools behind your web service, okay? And then when I click on an appliance on that web page,
Yep.
you suck it out of VMware, do
Absolutely.
demo, it'll work.
Absolutely.
Okay, perfect.
Want to come work for us? We're working on the interoperability with a VMware and with AMIs as well. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, the other thing that perhaps you haven't talked about is how do ISPs make money? And VMware, they figure out a way to make money. It's like developers on iTunes making, iPad and iPhone apps. I mean, if you're,
And so how do ISVs make money?
sorry?
I'm sorry, like, was your question is how do the ISVs make money in this?
It's like in the marketplace,
Yeah.
ISPs have a way of making money.
Right.
Here, you need to actually come up with an incentive for them to come and make money.
And so the incentive is with with our vision for it is that we will, the ISV can create a price, or they can actually, define what their software costs, and then.
Maybe a better way to rephrase the question is the same with music. There's an issue of piracy here. So ISPs may have licensing and be able
Right.
to make money that way, but what if people steal it and they don't make money?
Right, and that's going to require some modifications to the software licensing models and the entitlements, and that's going to have to tie into the infrastructure of the cloud, so that it can authorize the piece of software that you're running is actually being paid for and is actually valid, and that stuff kind of needs to be built and defined and standardized as well. But we can charge an extra fee per hour for that piece of software on top of the infrastructure service, and then and then give that money back to the ISV. Yeah.
So you were talking about limiting I/O bandwidth.
Mhm.
How effective has that been for you? Because it has not been very effective for me.
It hasn't been very effective for us either. we're looking for better tools. What we've actually done is, a lot of kind of what we did a long time ago with network, utilization and network DOS attacks, and and anyone here that's run an ISP network. Right, yeah, I know, but I was getting to that, is that, the whack-a-mole strategy, where you just monitor everything very, very closely and get really early warning when any node is underperforming or when any VM is using more than its share of I/O, and then take action to investigate and see whether or not that customer is doing something, if they were hacked or otherwise running something that they shouldn't be, and then sort of manually deal with that. It doesn't happen as often, that often, but it's still a pretty manual process with just, a lot of monitoring in place. Yeah. And expensive as a result, yeah.
Well, ultimately, it's undecidable.
I'm sorry?
It's undecidable. You cannot, from any external viewable statistics, infer whether or not the thing in a VM is legitimate or not. Moreover, if
Oh,
you
true.
into a VM,
True.
determine that, then
True.
I've never placed my workload in your world.
Yeah, we don't go into VMs. We don't go into VMs at all, but we can call our customer and we can talk to them and we can figure out what they're doing and kind of move them over to a hybrid server if they're using more I/O than they need, or move them to a less utilized node. But we absolutely.
It's just price the resources appropriately. Pricing has miraculous effects on people's behaviors.
But how do we charge a higher price for something that we can't guarantee a QoS on? I mean, it's.
Yeah, we could charge it like the way some people charge bandwidth, where we just count. We put a counter on how many IOPS they use.
Right.
And then just, if they go above a certain level, charge them extra.
Sure.
Or cut them off.
Yeah, but it's the rate that's important. If the customer can't get, if they can't get the performance that they need for their app.
The same is true of bandwidth. And the idea with bandwidth,
95th percentile. Right.
is it makes them careful.
Right. Right.
Well, the only other way to do this, you can do network-based storage, which case you can.
Network-based storage.
The storage software that actually. No, wait a minute. You can't say. Well, yes, I agree. You can't say if you're going to try and limit it, you may get stuck anyway.
There are some interesting companies out there that are trying to solve this problem, and they're trying to create a dynamic way for a guest to access, kind of different storage repositories on a node, each with their own speed characteristics. And so, if your node has access to some solid-state stuff, some SAS stuff, and some SATA stuff, like really fast, not so fast, and slower, then it can look at what your guest is doing and sort of dynamically move your workload over to a different storage subsystem to give you better performance. But those kind of technologies are still very nascent.
On your requirements, you listed both quality of service and wanting support over the network. And the two are kind of mutually exclusive. So for your customers, which one is the most important?
Well, the most important is to prevent sharing problems, right? We should never have a situation where one customer doing one thing causes an outage for another customer, and so at the very least, kind of that's the most important. But quality of service is more important than overcommitment. Because we want to be able just to, kind of like you said, is a charge them more for a higher quality of service.
It's interesting you say that, though, because I think everybody always believes that. And when we first did Zen, we put in a reservation-based thing. We put
Right.
reservation-based disk I/O, network I/O, CPU, and everything. And people went, my system isn't being 100% utilized. Your system is broken, right? And it was designed that way.
Right.
So it's, I don't know, maybe you're right, but I think my experience is if you give people exactly what they ask for, they're pissed off. They want more than they ask for.
Which is why you have to give them a way to easily kind of crank up what their maximums are if they want to use more, and then pay more for it.